Hi, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're going to be talking about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and why they're becoming such an important housing option here in Rhode Island. For many families, staying in the community they love is getting harder. Today, we'll walk through what an ADU is, what it isn't, why more homeowners are considering them, and what the process really looks like. My goal is that by the end of this webinar, you'll have a clear understanding of whether an ADU could be the right solution for you. Now, before we dive in, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Abby Beauchemin, and I'm a project manager with Beauchemin Designs. We're a local, family-operated residential design firm that has been serving Rhode Island homeowners since 1990. Over the years, we've worked closely with families navigating design, zoning, and construction, and more recently, we've seen a growing interest in ADUs as housing pressure increases. Today, I'm going to walk you through what we've learned so you can better understand whether this option makes sense for you. Let's start with a simple question. Why are so many Rhode Islanders struggling to stay in their communities? Housing costs have risen dramatically over the past several years. Starter homes are becoming harder to find, wages haven't kept pace with inflation, and more families are being pushed out of the neighborhoods they've lived in for generations. For many people, it's no longer about upgrading to a bigger home. It's about whether they can afford to remain where they already are. And this issue isn't just about pricing. It's also a supply issue. Rhode Island's population has continued to grow, but housing production hasn't kept up. At the same time, rental prices have climbed sharply. When population increases and construction doesn't keep pace, we create scarcity, and scarcity drives up costs. Add in restrictive land use regulations and limited construction-ready land, and the gap becomes even wider. The imbalance has long-term effects, and we can see that clearly when we look at home values. Over the last 10 years, the average cost of a typical three-bedroom home has increased significantly. For young families, first-time buyers, and even middle-income households, that price growth has outpaced earnings, which means fewer people can enter the market and more people feel stuck. So the question becomes, if building large subdivisions isn't realistic in a small state like Rhode Island, what is another option? One answer that's gaining momentum across Rhode Island is something called an accessory dwelling unit, or ADU. Not massive developments, not high rises, but small, flexible housing created within existing neighborhoods. ADUs allow homeowners to add a secondary independent living space on their property, and recent changes to Rhode Island state laws have made the approval process more streamlined than in the past. So let's take a closer look at all things ADU. Now that we've introduced ADUs, let's take a quick look at what we'll be covering today. We'll start with the basics, what an ADU actually is. Then we'll talk about what an ADU is not, including some of the limitations and rules. After that, we'll look at why more homeowners are choosing ADUs and how they're being used in real life. We'll go over some common questions and potential pitfalls to avoid. And finally, I'll explain how Beauchemin Designs helps homeowners through the process. This is meant to be a practical overview, not overly technical, so you can walk away with a clear understanding of whether an ADU might work for you. Let's start with an important question. What is an ADU? An accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, is a secondary housing unit located on the same property as a primary home. It's a fully independent living space, which means it has its own kitchen, its own bathroom, a sleeping area, and a separate entrance. So in simple terms, it's a small house on the same property as a larger home. So now that we've talked about what an ADU is, let's look at the different types. There are three main types of ADUs, and the right one depends on your property and your needs. The first type is an attached ADU, which is built as part of your existing home or as an addition. The second type is a detached ADU, which is a separate structure somewhere on your property, like a backyard cottage. And the third type is an internal ADU, which is created within the footprint of your home. This could be a finished basement, attic space, or a converted garage. Each type gives homeowners flexibility to create extra living space while working with what they already have. Here we have an example of an ADU layout we've already built. Even though this unit is connected to the main home, you can see that it still functions as a completely independent living space. It has its own entrance, its own rooms, and its own layout. And this is really the key idea behind ADUs. They're separate living spaces that exist on the same property as your main home. Now that we've talked about what an ADU is, it's just as important to talk about what an ADU is not, because this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. ADUs are designed for long-term living, not short-term rentals, so they typically cannot be used as Airbnbs or vacation rentals. They're meant for stable, long-term occupancy. They're also limited in size. In Rhode Island, a one-person ADU can be up to 900 square feet. A two-person ADU can be up to 1,200 square feet. They're designed for smaller households, not large multifamily setups. ADUs also must follow local zoning rules, including setbacks, lot coverage, parking requirements, and building codes, and these rules can vary depending on the town. This is why working with someone familiar with Rhode Island regulations can make the process much smoother. So now that we understand what ADUs are and what their limits are, let's talk about why so many homeowners are choosing them. ADUs offer flexibility that traditional housing often doesn't. They allow families to stay close together, create additional living space, and adapt their homes to changing needs. They're not just additions, they're long-term solutions that make homes more flexible over time. One of the biggest benefits of ADUs is that they allow people to stay in the communities they're familiar with. Family members can stay close to family, friends, neighbors, and schools. And in Rhode Island, that matters. Our communities are tightly connected, and moving even a few towns over can mean leaving behind support systems and routines. The only reason someone should have to leave the home they grew up in should be because of opportunity or choice, not because housing has become too expensive to stay. ADUs give families a way to stay rooted where they already belong. Another major benefit is financial stability. ADUs can provide supplemental income that helps homeowners stay in their homes. That income can help cover mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, living expenses, or college savings. For some families, that additional income can make the difference between staying in their home and having to sell. It also helps older homeowners stay independent and age in place. ADUs don't just help individual homeowners, they help communities too. By using existing neighborhoods more efficiently, Rhode Island can reduce long commutes, lower carbon emissions, and preserve farmland and open space. Instead of expanding outward, ADUs allow growth within existing communities. And in a small state like Rhode Island, building smarter instead of bigger really matters. At this point, people usually start to have questions. So let's go through some of the most common ones. One common misconception is that ADUs are only for rental income, but they can be used for many things. Family members, aging parents, adult children, home offices, or long-term tenants. Another misconception is that ADUs lower property value. In many cases, they actually increase value by adding flexible living space. Some people also assume they can build anywhere on their property, but zoning rules determine what's allowed and where an ADU can go. And finally, a lot of people think ADUs are just tiny houses, but ADUs are really fully functional homes designed for long-term living. Of course, like with anything, ADUs aren't without challenges. Understanding the potential pitfalls early can save time and money later. One of the biggest challenges is navigating legal and regulatory requirements. Approvals can take months, requirements vary by town, and zoning rules can be complicated. Things like parking requirements and setbacks can impact what's possible on a property. Without proper planning, delays can quickly become expensive. Another challenge can be neighborhood concerns. Some neighbors worry about density, neighborhood character, and traffic. Often, these concerns come from fear of change rather than actual impact, but strong opposition can slow projects down. Good planning and communication can help prevent these issues. If these challenges aren't handled properly, they can cost time and money. Delays mean higher costs, more revisions, more stress. Planning ahead makes a big difference. This is where Beauchemin Design comes in. We act as a one-stop shop for ADU projects. We guide homeowners from concept to completion. This includes design, permits, zoning, and approvals. We help avoid costly mistakes and delays, and we streamline the process so homeowners save time and stress. At Beauchemin Designs, we don't just build ADUs. We help families stay rooted, we help keep communities strong, and we help make home ownership attainable in Rhode Island. We help smooth the process so you can remain in the place you call home. ADUs offer a practical and flexible solution to Rhode Island's housing challenges. They help families stay close together, they create financial stability, and they make better use of existing neighborhoods. And while the process can feel complicated, you don't have to navigate it alone. Beauchemin Designs guides homeowners through every step, from concept to design to permits to completion. If you've been thinking about expanding your home, keeping family close, or creating additional income, now is the time to explore your options. Because you shouldn't have to move 3 towns over just to afford to stay. Sometimes the solution isn't moving, it's building where you already belong. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, please reach out to the owner of Beauchemin Designs, Ed Beauchemin. You can reach him via email, phone number, or by inquiring on our website, beauchemindesigns.com.